Undercover boss eats at his restaurant, stops cold when waitress says tips never reach staff. Not every story begins with a meeting. Sometimes it starts with a cup of coffee and a fake name. Monday morning, light fog. Wind swept past the wooden benches outside Sunrise Diner branch number 28. According to reports, this was a stable location. Revenue steady, customer ratings acceptable, staff turnover not too abnormal. But for Derek Langston, CEO of the entire Sunrise Restaurant Group, those numbers weren't enough to feel at ease. He used to trust data. But after 2 decades steering a corporation with more than 70 branches, Derek had learned one thing. Whenever an internal environment grows suspiciously quiet, it usually means something is being suppressed. That morning, Derek didn't show up as the CEO. No private driver, no signature gray suit. Just a middle-aged man in a thin flannel shirt and a cap pulled low, signing his receipt under the simple alias, Walt. He picked a table by the window of vantage point where he could oversee the entire dining area. He ordered a black coffee and toast. Simple, just like the way he wanted to begin, quietly. No one recognized him. No one knew that the silent man stirring his coffee was actually the person who had built this entire system, who had once designed every touch point in the service process, who had believed that fairness could be programmed into company culture. And today, he came to see whether that culture was still running truthfully, or if all that remained were polished summaries, dressed up by things no one dared speak out loud. If you believe these truths should be told, hit subscribe. We've got more stories yet to be uncovered. Some words aren't said to draw attention, but they're strong enough to wake up a system that seems to be running fine. Cassie was the morning server. In her early 20s, uniform neat, hair tied up, but her eyes beneath those lashes carried a weariness no coffee could rescue. She brought the dish to Derek's table, a toast, sunny-side egg, and freshly brewed black coffee. "Do you need anything else, sir?" Her voice was soft, polite, but not energetic. Derek smiled, politely shook his head. He noticed how she bent down to wipe a few drops off the table edge, then turned away like it was a habit long ingrained. And then he spoke gently, sounding like a curious customer trying to make conversation. "Is your morning shift going all right, getting decent tips?" Cassie paused, not sure if from surprise or hesitation. She gave a faint smile, not one of joy, but neither of complaint. "It's okay. But honestly, we don't really get to keep much of the tips. Usually, only a few people actually receive a share." A sentence that seemed harmless, light, released like a sigh held in for too long, then accidentally slipping past her lips. But for Derek, the man who had personally signed off on the automatic tip distribution policy tied to POS systems to ensure absolute fairness, it wasn't just a casual remark, it was a warning. Silence, his eyes fixed on Cassie, who had already turned away, continuing her service at table 4. No more complaints, no accusations, no plea for help. But it was the calmness in her words that sent a deeper chill through Derek than any internal report ever had. He tightened his grip slightly around the coffee cup. It was still hot, but from that moment on, this breakfast was no longer a meal. It was the beginning of an investigation, a confrontation, with the truth, and with the very system he once believed was fair. A system doesn't have to collapse to be wrong. It only has to remain silent long enough for the wrong to become standard procedure. For 3 hours straight, Derek sat in the corner of the diner at the table near the fogged-up window. His coffee cooled. The toast remained nearly untouched. But he hadn't come here to eat. He came to observe, and he saw clearly. Cassie never stopped moving. Table 2 was barely cleared before she had already grabbed a tray of pastries from the kitchen to serve table 5. She remembered every order without writing anything down. Knew which guests liked their toast extra crispy. Who didn't want butter? Everything flowed as if she were the one running the entire morning shift. But then, when it came time to pay, something strange repeated itself. Cassie stepped back. Let Ryan handle the POS. White shirt, shiny watch, hair gelled to perfection. Ryan didn't serve any of the tables, but he always showed up at just the right moment, standing behind the counter, POS device in hand, like it was his birthright. One swipe, a short smile, and the tip from a customer meant for Cassie was logged into the system under the name Ryan D. Derek didn't ask any further questions. He simply recorded every detail. And that afternoon, he returned to headquarters where the internal system was controlled. He logged in using his founder-level access, opened the access control list for branch number 28. The first name appeared, Cassie T. POS Access, denied. Reason, pending review of high-volume hour handling capability. Last updated 5 months ago. Approved by Doug H., branch manager. Derek frowned. He opened the training data. Cassie had completed the POS handling course 6 months ago. Rating: Excellent A. Final trainer: Ryan D. Technical assistant, nephew of Doug. A closed loop. Doug gave the reason to temporarily restrict. Ryan confirmed the training, and the one who operated the system was always family. He continued to the digital tip distribution summary from the past quarter. Cassie served an average of 54% of tables per week. POS transactions: 0. Digital tips received: 0%. Ryan served less than 15%. POS transactions: 82%. Tips logged: $12,340. But what left Derek almost breathless was found under the secondary beneficiary account section. A total exceeding $18,000 marked as internal processing fees had been redirected from the POS system to a secondary business account. DH Logistics, LLC. Owner: Douglas H. No associated operating costs, no matching invoices. Just one line entry: POS balancing, allocation tier 2. Derek sat still. He no longer saw a faulty system. He saw a system that had been manipulated deliberately, systematically, and fully legitimized through every line of data. Cassie, the hardest working server, was excluded from fairness with a single click. And the one who clicked wasn't the system. It was the very people he had trusted to protect it. Tomorrow, Derek knew he would return, not to observe anymore, but to make it clear that when fairness is abused, it will be reclaimed. With full names, and in front of everyone. Not every abuse leaves fingerprints. Sometimes, it only takes a single blank cell, left empty at the right moment. That night, Derek didn't go home. He stayed at the office alone in a dimly lit room, with only the sound of typing and a screen illuminating line after line of data. Each line a piece of evidence. Each spreadsheet a slice of truth the executive board meetings never quite reached. He pulled up the system activity history, the override log, which recorded all privileged actions. Findings: 5 months ago, Cassie's POS access was revoked by Doug H. Note entered: slow under pressure. Related transactions: none. No errors, no formal warnings. Approval granted by Ryan D. Then came a series of tip distribution formula edits in the auxiliary system, carried out after business hours, all tied to the internal account. DH, admin, a placeholder username traced back to the IP address of the branch number 28 manager's office computer. Derek opened the branch's work schedule. Cassie's shifts almost perfectly aligned with the days of highest revenue. Yet the tip data reflected the opposite. Her share, 0. Meanwhile, Ryan, listed in the system as temporarily absent during those days, was still recorded as having handled 7 transactions daily. Derek typed one final command: pause backchannel protocol log, branch 28. I'm sen. A flagged entry appeared. Redirect a portion of digital tips from the primary account to the intermediary processing group, pending reallocation by week, to be executed only with Doug H.'s confirmation. No one else was granted approval rights, and no one had ever audited it. Derek slumped slightly forward, closed his eyes. The picture was now clear. A young woman who served with precision and integrity, a manager manipulating the system under the word temporary, and a group of staff operating to receive without ever giving, and a system designed to be fair but turned into a tool for privilege. But that night, Derek was not in despair. He opened a new file and typed the title: 28, Public Audit Protocol. First line: transparency needs no defense. It just needs to be brought into the light in front of everyone. Tomorrow, he would return, no longer as Walt, the passing guest, but as Derek Langston, the man who would restore fairness to where it belongs, at the counter, on the screen, and beneath the eyes of every single employee. There are truths that don't need to be shouted. They just need to be placed in the right spot at the right time so no one can look away anymore. Friday, 7:58 a.m. Sunrise Diner, branch number 28, opened as usual. The atmosphere quiet. Coffee machine humming steadily. Cassie was wiping down table number 6. Ryan stood behind the counter, POS machine in hand as always. Doug had just stepped out of the cold storage, clipboard in hand, finalizing the morning shift. The front door swung open. 3 people in internal audit uniforms entered, Sunrise HQ, name tags glinting under the morning light. Behind them came a man in a deep navy shirt, no hat, no disguise, and no need for introductions. Derek Langston, CEO, founder. The man had returned. Doug froze. His clipboard slipped from his hands. Mr. Langston, I wasn't informed. That's because we're not here for permission today, Derek interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but each word struck like stone. One of the auditors opened a laptop, connecting it to the large display behind the counter. No more breakfast menus, no more images of Sunnyside eggs. Only one cold, analytical screen laying bare truths that could no longer be denied. Cassie T. Served 54% of tables. POS transactions, 0. Digital tips received, 0%. Ryan D. Served, 13%. POS transactions, 82%. Tips received, $12,340. Internal transfer, 18,270. Note, pause balancing, tier dos. Beneficiary account, DH Logistics LLC. Owner, Douglas H. Then came screenshots of internal emails. Keep Cassie on the floor. Good with guests, but no need to appear in the system. Ryan does the terminal faster. Tips to be split internally at week's end. Temporarily revoke Cassie's POS access. Reason, insufficient high-traffic reflexes. Derek said nothing more. He simply turned toward Doug and Ryan, both frozen under the stares of staff and customers alike. You didn't just manipulate a system, Derek said, his tone as steady as a formal declaration. You manipulated trust by legalizing injustice and labeling it as internal. He then turned to Ryan. You weren't the one serving, but you were the one getting paid. Because you were the one assigned to process transactions, something we never defined in any of our training manuals. Derek gave a subtle nod. An auditor stepped forward and handed out 2 envelopes stamped boldly. Termination, notice immediate effect. No arguments. No clarifications. A young staffer behind the counter quietly removed his headset. Cassie was still standing at table number 6 tray, clenched tight in her hands, eyes unblinking. Derek stepped into the center of the restaurant where everyone could hear him clearly. Starting today, he declared, Sunrise will return to its true nature. Every POS transaction will be recorded under the actual server's name. All tips transparent, in real time. No more privileges hiding behind a last name. No more vague excuses called performance reassessment. He turned toward Cassie and for the first time looked at her not as just an employee, but as a witness to integrity, someone who had once been excluded from the system. And you, thank you for not stepping back, for staying silent long enough that it forced us to finally open our eyes. Cassie didn't reply, but she nodded not to agree, but to confirm that she at last had been seen. End quote. There are nods that carry more weight than a verdict. No one moved, no applause, but also no objections. Only silence clear and sharp, like early winter wind slipping through a crack in the door. Ryan lowered his head. Doug stood frozen, hands trembling slightly, eyes still fixed on the statistics projected above. A new tip entry had just popped up, this time under the name of the actual server. Ben L. Tip, 4,25. Derek turned his back toward the screen. We cannot expect honesty from staff when the system itself rewards those who stand outside the process. He looked around the room. At every face, every pair of eyes, people who once thought they couldn't change anything were now witnessing the moment it finally happened. A new staff member behind the counter quietly pulled out a notebook and began writing. Cassie gently gripped the edge of the table, then set the tray down and walked toward the sink. But this time, not to retreat, but to continue. Derek accepted a cup of coffee handed to him by another employee. He turned it slowly in his hand, but didn't drink. Tomorrow, this screen will stay on. The data won't be bundled up to suit whoever's more convenient, and no one will have to bow their head before a device they have every right to operate. He paused for a moment, then continued, this time not as an executive, but as a man who had silently witnessed too many wounds being legitimized. Because fairness doesn't come from technology. It comes from courage, from people like Cassie, who didn't walk away, even when no one saw her. From the kitchen, the sound of a knife slicing bread rang out an ordinary sound, but in that moment, it was like a bell signaling the beginning of a new rhythm. Cassie returned to the counter, removed her old apron, adjusted her name tag, and held her head high. She didn't say anything to Derek, only quietly stepped into her rightful position. But now, that position truly belonged to her. And on the digital display for the first time in many months, Cassie T. Post-transaction, 7,858 AM. No one applauded. But the way people looked at each other was enough for everyone to know something had just been made right. At the right time, by the right person. In-house. Fairness doesn't begin with policy. It begins by calling the right name of someone who's been silent for too long. 1 month later, Sunrise Diner, Branch 28, still opened at 6 a.m. as usual. But something had changed. Not the menu, not the uniforms, but in the way people walked into the space knowing for certain, today they would be seen. Behind the counter was a large digital display, running the line, live tips, real-time, transparent, verified. Below that, carved into oak wood in smaller letters, every contribution has a name, every effort leaves a trace. Each time a customer paid, the server's name appeared alongside the recorded tip amount. No one was erased from the system. No more hidden transactions. No more end-of-shift redistribution. Cassie, now in the new dark blue trim manager's uniform, stepped out from behind the counter. Her name tag gleamed clearly. Cassie T, branch manager. She no longer walked quickly, as if afraid to disturb anyone. She walked steadily, confidently, as if she were now the one keeping the space breathing. At the table by the window, Michael sat alone like an old guest returning. New documents, new assistant, new auditors. Cassie approached, carrying a cup of black coffee. She placed it down gently like a thank you that didn't need words. She looked at him, no longer hesitant. This morning's breakfast is no longer one I have to skip because of tips. Derek didn't reply right away. He lifted his cup, the coffee aroma, just as rich as always. But in the warmth rising from the rim, something had changed. A system that once remained silent had now learned to listen. A person once excluded was now managing and safeguarding fairness for an entire space. Cassie turned away, not to avoid his gaze, but to continue a new shift. In a role that now truly belonged to her, Michael took a sip. The taste was familiar. But today, the aftertaste was trust. Final human message. Fairness does not come from rules. It comes when those who deserve to be seen are no longer hidden. Fairness doesn't stop at a digital display. It must be upheld, protected, and handed to those once forced to work in silence. Cassie passed the counter and paused for a moment when a new employee named Ben was fumbling to locate an online order. She didn't scold, didn't rush. She simply placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You don't need to be fast yet. Just be accurate. Tips won't disappear. The system's on your side now." Ben nodded, a bit bewildered, but when he looked up at the screen by the counter where the line clearly read, "Order number 51, served by Ben L." His eyes lit up. Michael saw it all. From his familiar spot, he wasn't just seeing Cassie. He was seeing a diner being run again by trust, not fear. One staff member at the counter proactively asked a guest if they needed more water. A young trainee greeted customers while rechecking orders without being told. There wasn't a single barked command across the diner. Only shared purpose and something humbler, the belief that effort would be seen. Cassie returned, this time not carrying coffee but holding a freshly printed shift schedule. She leaned in and spoke softly to Michael. "I'm assigning Ben to Area A at lunch. He's still a bit slow, but he's kind. Before, no one let him near the POS. Now, the machine records the right name." Michael didn't respond right away. He nodded, his gaze drifting toward the glass door, where a customer had just entered, smiling at Ben as he greeted them. He didn't need any more data. No summary report was necessary. The cup of coffee in front of him had cooled a little, but the aftertaste still lingered. Not the richness of Arabica beans, but the clear flavor of a system that had been repaired by letting the right person keep its heartbeat alive. Fairness doesn't appear on its own. It needs to be nurtured by those who were once overlooked, but never stop believing that kindness is the only way to build something that lasts.